I am rolling here. I want to start, if we can, with we have a lot of stuff that you guys want to get to, and we'll do that. But I want to start with what's happening right now with tariffs and the president and aluminum and steel. How will that affect us in Oklahoma, or will it?
Well, it won't affect us so much in Oklahoma, but it's an appropriate time to talk about it because we just got back from this trip through the South China Sea, and there are a lot of our allies over there that are just apoplectic about this. They think the world's going to come to the end if we have this. Now, the president said this, and if you'll remember, Rick, during his campaign, he talked about doing something about tariffs because they were importing all of our aluminum and our steel. And so without really getting into the ramifications of that thing, he made some commitments. Now, he's already backing down a little bit on those commitments. In our conversation with the groups that we were in the Philippines and Taiwan and Seoul, South Korea, and Japan. They're all very much concerned about this, and we told them. Now, I took with me 5 members of the Armed Services Committee, and they all agreed that the president's going to moderate that position. So while it's hysterical right now, it's going to be moderated.
All right, now let's go ahead and talk about a little bit more about your trip. What kind of things did you guys get accomplished there, and did you have a specific goal you were trying to get?
Yeah, we did, because this is a new threatened area. And again, this is the Senate Armed Services Committee, and I had one member of the House Armed Services Committee go also. I normally do that. And we went to the Philippines, Taiwan, Seoul, Korea, Tokyo, Guam, Okinawa, and that whole area down there. And because we know that there is a growing threat. Now, we're all aware of the threats that face us right now. We've been talking about Russia. We've been talking about Ukraine. But no one talks about the South China Sea. Right now, the Chinese have reclaimed land. That's a word that they use. It's not really reclaiming land because there's no land there. They've gone into areas that are ocean. They don't have a license to it. It's not a legal thing, but they start building on it. And they have built all over the South China Sea huge plots of land, and all to be used for military purposes. They have runways, they have rockets, they have everything you can think of that would be involved in a war. Right now, the total amount of land that they have created is over 3,000 acres, and it's all to be used for military purposes. That sounds really far out because we don't think of them as that aggressive. But our allies there, which have been like the Philippines, Taiwan, South Korea, they're very much concerned about it, and they are moderating their opposition to China because of that threat. So that's what's happening there, and that's it's an area that could be very serious. Of course, we know about the other threat that's out of there, and that is North Korea. North Korea has, on November the 28th, demonstrated that they could range mainland United States with a rocket. A lot of the adversaries say, well, no, they really couldn't do that because that one that they used on November 28th did not have a payload. In other words, it didn't have a bomb in it, and so they have to come to a conclusion that maybe they wouldn't be able to do that if they had a payload. Well, that's not very comforting when you stop and think about the strange behavior of Kim Jong-un in North Korea. So that threat is there. It's a very real threat to not just to those that are like South Korea. We spent quite a bit of time in South Korea, but it's a threat to the United States. So that is a new threat. We can sit around and talk about what we were going to do to try to help our allies in the Philippines or Taiwan, but when it now can range the United States, that's a dangerous thing. So that's a part of what we're doing with the military, and I think you're aware that we have now changed our budget so that after 8 years of Obama and weakening our military, we're now back with starting to rebuild again.
And that is good news. And then, of course, this morning, North Korea says they'll come to the table and talk about it.
Yeah, here's the thing about they said that this is overnight, last night. And I'm kind of, that just fortifies what we've been saying, because do you remember when Kim Jong-un made the statement? He said, I have a button, I can press this, and I can send a rocket out. immediately, instead of being a pacifist, of being what we would have gotten with Obama, Trump said, all right, you do that. We have a bigger button. Ours works. And we'll blow you out of the tub. Well, after he said that, it was a matter of not even hours after he said it, North Korea went to South Korea and said, we want to participate in the Winter Olympics. And they've been talking to him ever since. And last night was a major breakthrough, I think, because the envoy that we have going to North Korea from South Korea has made a major breakthrough, according to overnight news. So that part is I think being downgraded. The threat that there one guy who some people think is certainly not predictable, and maybe even worse than that, has a weapon that can reach the United States of America.
You mentioned President Trump. We obviously want to talk more about his policies. And one of the things I thought was interesting in the email from your office was how some of his things, and especially tax cuts, have helped Oklahoma businesses. Give us some examples.
Okay. Well, we have actually, if you want all of the examples, you can get that on my website, inhofe.senate.gov, and we list all of the companies, the corporations that are giving sizable enhancements to their employees. As an example, American Airlines, this is about 2 weeks ago, and the flight attendant didn't know who I was, and I overheard her talking about the fact that all of the employees, except for the officers, were getting $1,000 bonuses, and sure enough, we checked, and that's I've since then ridden the American Airlines several times, and they all reconfirm it. So all of these companies, what was the big one that they had?
Walmart.
Yeah, Walmart. Yeah. Walmart is a huge employer. Of course, they are doing some cutbacks, but those who are remaining have had enhancements. And so I have the list in front of me of 124 corporations doing business in Oklahoma that have actually given bonuses to their employees. Now, the reason for this is the tax bill, and I guess we haven't talked about that in a lot of detail, but the tax bill that was passed, the tax reductions, the tax reform, is so similar to what we've dealt with in the past. And people say, well, how can you reduce marginal rates and still have an economy that is growing without increasing the debt? Well, the way it's very simple. Back in when Kennedy was president in 1962, he needed more federal money for the Great Society programs. And his statement was, this is almost verbatim, I'm going from memory, he said, we need more revenue for our Great Society programs, and the best way to increase revenue is to reduce marginal tax rates. Well, he reduced the top rate from 90% to 70% and all other comparable rates. 2 years later, the revenue increased by 30%. Then this history repeated itself when Reagan came in 1981. The total amount of money, revenue that came into the federal coffers was $469 billion. After 2 years, about 2.5 years, that grew to $720 billion. And all because the increase, with every 1% increase in the economy, that equates to $3 trillion of additional revenue over a 10-year period. That's happened before. It's happened every time that they do that. And that's going to be very noticeable in our economy.
Notice he'd written an op-ed piece, which I thought was interesting, because infrastructure has been a big deal. We've obviously dealt with it a lot in Oklahoma with roads and bridges. Tell me more about that.
Well, they can find that in my website, too. It was in a Wall Street Journal op-ed piece that I did, and talking about the fact that the two things that if you just kind of stand back and look at all the things that government does, the two things that were in the Constitution are defending America and then infrastructure. They called them post roads back then, but that's what we're supposed to be doing. And I think that all of our listeners know that I have been, chairman of that transportation committee. I've taken people, a lot of people from the media around the state to show them construction sites in Oklahoma. And that was a time when I was opposed to something that our governor was doing in not coming up with a 20% match. All that's changed since then. But right now, the president has a very ambitious program. And you think, well, he's only talking about $200 $1 billion over this period of time, but that is money that can be leveraged into larger amounts. And so he has, for all practical purposes, about 10 times that much money that's going to be coming out in construction. People are depending on it. You talk to the Oklahoma Department of Transportation, they'll tell you that one of the few things that is done right by government is how we handle transportation. When we have a transportation reauthorization bill, it's one where we go to the states and say, all right, what are your priorities? It's not one of these situations where we know more about Oklahoma in Washington than you know. So we go to the states, they make their priorities, and then that's how everything starts. Obviously, if you live in Wyoming, there's lots of roads but no people. If you go to New Jersey, just the opposite. So you have to have a formula to most of which is paid for through the gasoline taxes.
I want to talk about your opinion about what President Trump said about guns last week after Parkland. He said a few things that kind of surprised and I think took some Republicans aback a little bit, that he met with the NRA and backed up just a little bit. Where do you think we're going to fall on this whole thing, and where do you fall on that? Should semi-automatic rifles be available for anybody over 18? Should there be more checks on these things, or do you think we're doing it right?
I think we're doing it right. People, the first thing they always go after every time there is a disaster such as that which you mentioned, or in any of our schools, the collectivists want to take up the guns, and that's what we went through 8 years of with the Obama administration. Now you stop and think about it. With the support of the President Obama, and the fact that he started off with control of the House, the Senate, and the White House, and there are some school shootings. He wasn't able to do it then, so it's not going to be done now. So my thing is, we are living in a society that the cities that are
sanctuary cities.
Oh yeah, she reminded me here, the sanctuary cities. When I'm on the stump or around Oklahoma talking, it's hard for people to believe that we have sanctuary cities where it is fashionable and legal to break the law. And consequently, you see a lot of young kids coming up in this kind of an environment. I just think that we have some problems that we're going to have to deal with, but it's not the fault of guns, and the collecting of guns or changing the rules on guns is not going to be something that's effective. Most of the things that are in this debate that everyone has been talking about are the bump stocks. Well, the bump stocks are something that would be illegal, but they're not, because at the time they were drawing up our laws, there weren't such things. So I don't think that we need to address the problem assuming that it is the fault of guns in our society, because I don't believe that. And I think that's where he's going to fall down, too.
That's what I was going to say. He at first, like I said, to shock some Republicans. You think he'll come back around to the side of what the GOP has always said?
You know what he does? He comes out and says these things. And, sir, I wish he had somebody looking at his tweets and maybe cleaning them up a little bit. But it seems like when he comes out with a statement that you think he's going to be criticized for, he comes out ahead. Just the example that you and I used a few minutes ago as with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. To come out with a statement that people are just cringing, thinking that that's going to cause Un to send a bomb over or something. Well, it had just the opposite effect. So the guy seems to be able to walk back and bounce back. And frankly, when you stop and think about what he's doing now to rebuild the military, what he's doing in his program for infrastructure in America, I think he's doing a great job.
All right. I think we've covered everything that we needed to cover. Is there anything else?
No, I don't think so. But I appreciate you, and we'll keep in touch with the kids down there, okay?
Yes, sir. Always. Thank you, sir.
All right.
Bye-bye.